Record now. There we go. We
Good
all get
morning.
that
Good
scary
morning.
morning. Yeah.
It's Sunday, February 27th, and we welcome Dr. Dan Schwartz to Macomb Solel Lakeside. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, and then he's going to set up what he's going to do, but we're really in for a treat. Dr. Dan, wait, I have to find all my notes here.
I know I've got mine scattered around.
Good. He was the assistant professor of oboe at the University of Oklahoma School of Music. He came to us because he is working at Salmon Schechter Day School, but will soon be joining Lake Forest College as a professor there. He's an avid performer, and he is an oboist and English horn player, and has played all over the world and in orchestras throughout North America. He has a bachelor in music and oboe performance from Vanderbilt. He has a master's of music degree from the University of Texas, Austin, a doctor of musical arts degree in oboe performance and literature from the Eastman School of Music. And I could tell you more about him, but he's going to tell you about the February strike of 1941, which happened in Amsterdam. It was the only direct strike against Nazi occupation launched by any city in World War II, and was truly a unique and politically fascinating event. He's going to tell you more about how he has done this performance. So without any further ado, Dr. Dan.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me in. Vanessa, thank you for having me in. I always, even when hearing that you can get a doctorate in oboe, I always think people are surprised. It still surprises myself that you can get a doctorate in actually a musical instrument and performance, which is cool. So that is in fact what I have. Thank you all again for coming for what I hope is really a truly unique hour. Vanessa and I were talking even a little bit before 10 this morning that this talk couldn't really be more apropos to what we're seeing unfold around the world and with Russia and Ukraine. And a lot of this talk is about remembrance, but also on moving kind of from bystander to upstander. And I think as Jews, that's always part of our self-mission and our community mission. And I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of being Jewish. And so we'll get into more with that over the course of the hour. As Vanessa mentioned, my name is Dan Schwartz. I'm a professional oboist, composer, and also the instructor of general music and sixth grade band at Salmon Schechter here in Northbrook. I first wanted to thank Macomb Solel Lakeside for hosting this morning's event. So thank you for having me in. I thought it would be best to give everybody a brief introduction to kind of the context behind the creation of the composition you're going to hear today, which is called February Strike for Oboe and Intentional Sound. Then I will get out of the way and we can all listen and experience the work together. And then afterwards, we'll come back together and talk and answer some questions that may come up. And if you have any questions about me, the oboe, the piece, or just general thoughts and things that you'd like to share, please, that is the time for that. And that's the most exciting part of the talk today. So to avoid any unnecessary Zoom glitches, which we all know, we've lived our life on Zoom long enough, the way today is going to go is I've actually pre-recorded the performance. And for time's sake, I synced the lecture portion to be read simultaneously with the music. So you're going to be reading along while you're listening. If you have headphones nearby, that's a great way to listen. If not, a computer is probably your next best bet. If you're on your phone, it still works. But there's going to be some reading to do on the video as we go through. So if you need reading glasses or something, that's now is the time to kind of prepare for your best listening and reading experience. So before I get talking about the work itself, I thought it would be great to actually discuss the oboe for a second. So this is the oboe. which is a member of the woodwind family. It's one of the fussiest instruments ever invented because we play on this tiny little reed that we say hates us. It's all comes down to this little piece of wood that we have to hand make all the time, and they're persnickety. So the oboe as we know it dates back to around the 1700s and has played a major role in classical music since then. The sound is incredibly sweet. And interestingly enough, this is my favorite fact about the oboe, is according to very fancy scientists and physicists and audiologists, the sound that the oboe makes is scientifically the closest to that of the human voice, which I think is really exciting. And I actually think that's why oboe is one of the more special instruments, because it has that kind of singing quality that every instrument is trying to capture. At the end of the day, we're all trying to be opera stars. So I thought I'd actually demonstrate what the oboe sounds like over Zoom, which is always a gamble. But here we go. So this is the oboe. This is the reed, which you can play by itself. And not a really beautiful sound on its own. There's not a whole lot you can do with it. But the reed goes into the top of the instrument. And then this is a little bit of what the oboe sounds like. So that is the oboe. I don't know why I played such a sad little tune, but um, the piece is
It was beautiful. It
well,
came
thank you.
across absolutely beautifully.
Good. It's always on Zoom. It can sound like so I'm glad we got there. Good. So that is the oboe. And if you have more questions about it, certainly I'm happy to answer. I could talk about the oboe for hours and hours. So looping back to the project, in a nutshell, this whole project began as part of a composition series I wanted to create to explore meaningful remembrance. Very often in classical music, you go see a concert, you might hear something by Mozart, you might hear something by a living composer, but all too often you leave the concert hall and you don't think much about that piece, how the piece was created, or about the composer really again until maybe the next time you see another Mozart piece. So I wanted my whole philosophy behind art and classical music is that it's really one of the most powerful tools we have in creating community dialogue, creating impact and effect around specific instances, specific moments. And so I really wanted to start exploring that more as a composer and a performer, rather than just playing the same Mozart concerto that we always play as oboists. And a lot of that is because today we live in a world where the news cycle is seconds long. The next big story is happening even before you can finish reading an article about something that just happened. Our global access is increasing all the time, and it's impossible to keep up with what's happening around the world. There's just too much to remember. But underneath this bombardment of information, this constant influx of news, I think there lies a kernel of obligation. All of us at some point need to stop, focus, and genuinely, meaningfully practice remembrance. Not everything, not all the time, but there has to be merit in taking time as an individual, and even more importantly, as a group, to practice remembrance, especially centered on the most essential historical events. We all have obviously heard the adage that those that don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. This couldn't be more evident than in the recently released study on Holocaust remembrance commissioned by the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany. After an extensive US national survey of millennial and Gen Z adults ages between 18 and 39, the results are staggering and sad, to put it mildly. As reported by The Guardian, The study shows that almost 2/3 of young American adults do not know that 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust. And more than 1 in 10, so more than 10%, believe that Jews caused the Holocaust. 48% of those surveyed, so basically half of those surveyed, could not name a single concentration camp or ghetto established during the Second World War. Almost a quarter of the respondents, 23%, said they believed the Holocaust was a myth, had been exaggerated, or they weren't sure. 1 in 8, 12%, said they had definitely not heard or didn't think they had heard anything at all about the Holocaust. 1 in 8 had said they had never heard anything about the Holocaust. And this is where it gets worse. More than half, 56%, said they had seen Nazi symbols on their social media platforms and in their communities, while 49%, again, half, had seen Holocaust denial or distortion/disinformation posts on social media or elsewhere online. I think it's pretty clear to see that not only are we losing sight of the Holocaust, but because of this global access, and anyone can put anything on the internet, younger generations are being fed distorted versions of historical fact. Not even distorted, false or lies. And, we hear this term disinformation, which I think is a disservice to everybody because it has information in the word, but it's false, it's fiction. When people read things online, they think it's the truth. And as a result of what we're seeing, American population between 18 and 39 are coming away where 1 in 10 think the Jews caused the Holocaust. Studies like this have been coming out for years. So in 2016, I started a journey of exploring remembrance by asking myself what I could do as an artist to fight back. Too often, we see concerts where the music is played at us, not with us or for us. We aren't inside the work in any way. We have little or no contextual allegiance to the performance, the composer, or the work itself, which isn't to discredit that those are beautiful concerts to attend. Beautiful music has been made for centuries, and that's not to discredit it in any way. But I think there's more we can do inside the medium. So I knew years ago that I wanted to be composing and centering my performance on a more connecting, immersive experience. So I originally wrote the piece you'll hear shortly, February Strike for Oboe and Intentional Sound, in 2018 for Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day. I was the first to admit then that most years I did nothing out of the ordinary to honor that day. And I'm Jewish. But as I'm getting older, I find myself wishing there was more I could do, not only on Holocaust Remembrance Day, but year-round, especially when we see data nowadays that 23% of American millennials think that the Holocaust was a myth. February Strike is the first work I composed using what I call intentional sound as a means to heighten audience engagement with the performance. And intentional sound is sound that's very specifically chosen for a specific reason, and I'll talk about that right now. In the summer of 2017, I flew to Amsterdam to field record ambient sound, so sounds that would be happening in spaces, public spaces, just as the world goes around you, in locations where the February strike actually occurred. So this strike, which happened in 1941 in Amsterdam, as Vanessa said, was the only direct strike any city took in opposition to Nazi occupation during World War II. While you'll read more about the strike during the performance of the piece, I knew I wanted to focus my composition on this event, an event where hundreds of thousands of non-Jews stood up to what they knew was inhumane and unconscionable. In classical music, we have something called program music, which is music that tells a specific story predetermined by the composer. So great examples of program music are Richard Strauss's Don Quixote, which tells the story of Don Quixote, where the trumpets in the orchestra actually bleat as goats. You can hear them making goat sounds when Don Quixote encounters them in the field. Hector Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique presents vignettes of an artist in his quest for love, at a ball, in the countryside, even marching to the scaffold where audiences can hear his chopped off head actually bounce a couple of times at the end of the movement, played very beautifully by the timpani. So launching off this notion of program music, I thought it would be fascinating to create my own programmatic piece outlining the February strike, so telling the story of the February strike, but instead of just alluding to events, like with trumpets making goat calls, I would actually use sound from where the events took place, which is what I call intentional sound. All of this is done in a hope to ground you, the listener, into the piece even deeper, enhancing your connection to the content and ultimately strengthening your remembrance of this event, which I fully realize many of you may not even have heard of this strike until now. I only came across it randomly in early 2017, which is kind of what started this whole journey in the first place, when I was just doing research on, Jewish events in Europe and started reading about the February strike. And I'm shocked. I had never heard of it, going through Hebrew school. And I mean, I know there's so much to cover, of course, but it's a really remarkable and beautiful event. And I think an important one that we all know about. So this really launched the beginning of my journey of creating music to really make sure that we remember these events and don't forget them. So after field recording, so after getting these sounds from Amsterdam, I was left with crafting an electronic soundscape to carry the story. So basically, I had taken all my colors. I had gotten train sounds, I've gotten people talking, I've gotten sounds of walking, sounds of traffic, sounds of squeaks, sounds of nature. And so I had all these different colors, and now I needed to use those colors on a canvas to create a picture. In this case, the canvas was putting it into audio editing software and creating an accompaniment picture or an audio picture, and in which I would be performing on top of. So every single sound used in the electronic soundscape or the electronic accompaniment was recorded in Amsterdam, which I'm quite proud of, since that makes a piece incredibly tricky to compose, because there aren't the traditional notes that we expect to hear in any piece of music that we're listening to. There's not a B natural or an F or a C major chord. I had to create that out of train sounds and bird calls and things like that. So after hours of editing, altering, I was able to create harmony, rhythm, form, all things we need to make an actual accompaniment for me to perform oboe on top of. So it just so happens that every single sound is an actual echo of the past, capturing places, sounds, and memories of the February strike of 1941 on a journey to more meaningfully remember and champion those who stood up for what they knew was right. I also want to use the strike as a metaphor for the larger picture, people rising up, moving beyond bystander, and actually doing something. This couldn't be more apropos to today's climate. We're in the wake of the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, protests, rallies happening literally right now all around the world with Russia and Ukraine. So today we celebrate the heroism for sticking up for what's right, using remembrance to fight back, and hopefully creating ripples of activism to curb the rising tide of anti-Semitism, but also the rising tide of war crimes and inhumane treatment of people regardless of their religious affiliation. So without further ado, I am pleased to present to you a performance of my piece, February Strike. Now is a good time to put on your headphones or get those reading glasses if you haven't already, if you need those. And please enjoy. I will now share my screen and I will launch the piece. All right, so I always like to save a lot of time to chat because I think that's the more important piece of this puzzle. So, Vanessa, how do you prefer? Is it people type into the chat box or they can just
Yeah, and
unmute and jump in?
right. Well, we have one question already in the chat box. I also have
Okay.
a hand up. So Carol wants to know, is this program being offered to middle schools and high schools?
I have um, not played it for. So, interestingly enough, I have performed that piece live only twice because it was written in 2018. So, as we were nearing it really kind of became COVID and then things
Yeah.
shut down. I did this for a parent education at Solomon Schechter actually last week, but the no, I haven't played it for middle school and high school students. I'd love to. I actually I've tried to reach out again. This everything kind of shut down as a result of COVID, but I tried to reach out to Hillel International and to try to talk with kind of university students, and being able to present it through Hillel International. So, and thank you everybody for the comments. That's very, I appreciate that. So thank you.
Pam, Hubie, go ahead.
I thought this was a very nice piece. It was more than that, it was wonderful. But, you know, I've been going to concerts for years. And what's interesting here, and I wonder how you're going to handle it, is are you going to, when you go to orchestra hall, are you having like a libretto that you're going to hand out and somehow with music, a score at the top so people know when to turn the page to match the music with the words?
Yeah, you know, it's when I originally created this piece, the multimedia synchronization didn't exist. And so all I did was play just the sounds. You wouldn't hear all that information that happened simultaneously, I gave before the performance. But to your point, every single subsequent performance has said, you can't play this any other way. You need to run that video while you're performing. And so now what I would do is I'd actually play that video. I'd remove the oboe part. And so I would perform live over the sounds in the back, but I would have the sounds in the back attached to the libretto or to the text that you were seeing running. So when COVID is free enough to resume live performances and things like that, that's the way I really truly hope to perform it from now on. I made this lecture recital really as a reaction to COVID because live music really stopped. And so lecture recitals became, and getting music to people became really important. So, but yeah, you're right on in the fact that I think from now on, when I present this live, it'll have to kind of be with that. But I also would love to have the text in the program too. So if people want to take that home with them, they can.
I really think that I just want to add, this piece needs the two of them have to be simultaneous. It's so powerful. It loses a lot if you don't have the words going at that moment. Agreed.
And I learned a lot from it. Someone made a note about multimedia. And so this is Evie. Am I pronouncing that right, Evie?
Yeah.
And it is, it really, you interact in very different ways, kind of this multimedia presentation. So Zoom hasn't been the worst thing because as performers, we learn a lot too about how we connect with audiences. So I think the multimedia aspect is the way to go for sure on this piece.
If we had been able to, Dan would have come to Macomb Soleil Lakeside. We would have, projected behind him and he would have played live. So I think that even synagogues and most schools have that type of equipment. Pamela Spadino, I saw your hand up. Did you have a question?
Okay. No, thanks.
Oh, no. Okay. All right. Anyone, I'm going to actually put on my gallery view. Does anyone, here comes more people. Does anyone else have a question? As always. So one, in our book club, we read the book, and I'll put it in the chat, House on Endless Waters by Emunah Alon, and it takes place in Amsterdam, and she mentions all the sounds that Dan so beautifully put together in the multimedia presentation. And it's about an Israeli who goes back to Amsterdam in the present to find out about his past, and there's a twist. And of course, when we think of Jews in Amsterdam, we immediately go to Anne Frank.
Right.
And I think, which is not a bad thing, but I think I had to Google the strike. It's just something we don't, it's not something that we learn about. We are lucky I believe in Illinois, it is, you have to teach the Holocaust. So I hope that 48% of kids who don't know about the Holocaust are not coming from Illinois. You need to read the chat because people are giving you lots of ideas of where you should be presenting.
Yeah.
I think we're very lucky to have you here. I would be remiss if I didn't ask, well, what's your follow-up to this going to be?
So, I was lucky because this was the summer of 2017 when I recorded. So I was composing in 2017, 2018. And then in the summer of 2019, which was the last summer before you could really do anything, I was in Krakow, in Poland, and I did the same thing. So this started this was the first of really wanting to do more and more and more of these pieces, and I hope to do 20. The next piece I wrote, based on kind of using sound from a very specific location to kind of enhance remembrance and connection, is on the life of Tadious Pankowicz, who was a pharmacist who voluntarily lived inside the Krakow ghetto, and as a result was able to smuggle in hair dye to change people's identities, to give medicine to babies so families could hide under their floorboards and a baby crying wouldn't give them away. And he was recognized with the Yad Vashem, obviously, many years later. But that piece is composed and ready to go. But that piece was written and was going to be premiered March 2020. And so
not funny.
That didn't happen.
Yeah.
And so I have yet to perform that piece live because there hasn't been any, and I haven't done any multimedia things for that yet. I plan to, but I didn't know how long COVID would last. I was really hoping to kind of, get back to playing live a lot sooner. Another interesting thing, Vanessa, to answer your question on what next. So shortly after that, the February strike, I performed it for the first time. I kind of asked myself that same question on what more could I do with this piece. And so I reached out to a visual artist, so a painter in New York City who was Dutch, Jona Verweer, and she still lives in New York City. And she runs a nonprofit that kind of is arts related to kind of events and historical events and things like that. And I said, what can we do? And she said, it's so interesting that you're contacting me because I'm looking to do something very, very multimedia and what she called augmented reality. And so we ended up getting a commission from an organization in Amsterdam that was to create a very multimedia work that was, so she painted 3 paintings, so she made a triptych, and then we had a coder, someone who's very fancy with technology, create a program that if you held your phone camera up to certain parts of the picture, it triggered audio and visual on your phone, so you could listen to the piece in certain parts as it related to the paintings, which was really interesting. And so that art installation actually toured. It started at Yeshiva University in New York City, and then it toured around some New York City art galleries. And then it was installed in Amsterdam for, I would say, 3 or 4 months in 15 different locations throughout the city. And then right before COVID shut down, the art installation was actually shortlisted to be displayed at the United Nations building, which would have been really exciting. And so we're hoping that still happens. They obviously weren't having people come in. And so we're hoping when things clear up, we'll be able to do that. And so, the piece had some good additional applications, which I thought was really exciting. And for me, someone who wants to reach as many audiences as we can, and I see also, speaking of audiences, for the Am Shalom, which would be perfect, and the First Presbyterian in Deerfield, I'll absolutely reach out to those places.
I'm going to let my colleagues know, and we'll have a YouTube link with the beautiful performance so they could hear it themselves. When we hear the clarinet, for me, it's very reminiscent of klezmer band, and it, transports me back to Eastern Europe. Would you ever do anything that is, dare I say, more modern or not? From the Holocaust era and before.
Absolutely. And so, this was a 100%. I would love to do, because like the note that the piece ends on is we aren't much past where we were 80 years ago. And so I would love to go to places where, and rather than just really remembrance, but where, things are actually still happening. And, where those events are going on, going to rallies of protests and getting the sound of that, going to that. And so I would absolutely love to do more and more of those things. I was really lucky because both in a university setting, I was able to apply for grant funding to do both those trips. So I was able to get the equipment I needed and to go for a week to visit the locations I need to and to get the recordings and things like that. So I'm going to continue to look for, obviously, with Lake Forest and things like that. But I really feel there are a lot of community organizations in Illinois, and I'd love to team up with the Illinois Holocaust Museum for something if possible. And, I'm excited to be back home. As Vanessa said, I was a professor at the University of Oklahoma for 10 years prior to moving back to Chicagoland this July. I grew up in Wheeling. I'm still in Wheeling right now. So I was one of 15 Jews in the Oklahoma City area when I was living in Oklahoma. There were more than that, but very small Jewish community there, which had its all perks also. But it's nice to be back, and there's so much community, which is really wonderful. And so if people have ideas of like, oh my gosh, I know this amazing thing, or you should really look into this, I'm always open for, and if my email wasn't shared on any of the invites and things, Vanessa, please feel free to give my email out to anybody who wants it. I'm happy to, get input and recommendations, because that just makes me better and more aware, because no one pretends to know everything. So, there are some people who pretend to know everything, but, if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear about them.
The other thing I wanted to ask, and if you have questions, you can raise your hand or put them in the chat. Did you do this in Oklahoma? And if so, how was it received?
I did do this in Oklahoma, and I intentionally that's why it was very important for me as a Jew living in Oklahoma to, all of my research as a university faculty was on creating meaningful dialogue and meaningful engagements and interactions around the rising tide of anti-Semitism, which is going to continue with my own art and my own composition, regardless of where I am and what I'm doing, because that's important to me. It was, interestingly enough, it was received very well. And so I actually teamed up with the Judaic Studies department on campus, and a professor of Jewish history who specialized kind of in World War II, gave a portion of a lecture. I talked for a little bit, and then I played the piece live. And it was the longest I've ever seen an audience stay after a concert. We had to be kicked out because the next concert, which was like 2 hours later, needed to come in to set up. And so it was, I immediately knew that this is a different way of performing. And, where it's so much about talking and listening and understanding and hearing people's stories and thoughts, because that's really, I think, what makes the concert experience shine. And so it was received very well in Oklahoma. I did a digital version of this for a nonprofit in Oklahoma called the Oklahoma Israel Exchange. Again, it was very, very well. And it's actually a non-Jewish organization, which is interesting. I think I see Bernie.
Is it evangelicals?
I don't think it actually is. I think it's just more about it was a Christian, not a Christian organization. It wasn't religiously affiliated, but I think that was more of its undertones. But it was the second in the position below executive director was a Jewish person involved in the organization. So I think it wasn't slanted religiously all that much.
No.
I think Bernie was
Yeah,
raising
Bernie,
his hand.
do you have a question or comment?
I want to take advantage of this situation.
Please.
This performance was wonderful,
Thank you.
and we really understood what you were doing. It has special meaning for us. Ivan, sitting next to me, was born in the Netherlands in 1939. Jewish mother, non-Jewish father. The non-Jewish father part helped to keep her alive. But by the end of the war, she already was witnessing the things that were happening there. And I know so much of her story, and this is very emotional for her, and it's hard for her to speak up in this way, but I can at least mention some of her experiences.
Please.
Her mother had TB in 1930, 42, 40, yeah, about 42, 40, 43. And so she was in a Catholic hospital. Sanatorium. But her family that were all in hiding eventually were found, her mother's family, and they were virtually all destroyed. Because her father was Catholic, she was saved. But she remembers the German boots marching, and she remembers the bonfires at the end of the war celebrating the war ending, the liberation. This was because we've visited the Netherlands together, and I've known her story and her family story. This was especially wonderful for us.
And I couldn't say more likewise for probably everybody on this call, because so thank you for sharing, and it's unbelievable. That's exactly why I do this. And so thank you for sharing, and we're glad you're here. And it's so important to keep talking about and to share stories. And I feel very lucky that I get to be around where people who lived through it and can still share their stories, because we know we're nearing, we're not going to have a lot of firsthand accounts, and with the internet and people deciding to create their own history. It's so important and I'm glad we have this on video because that's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I lost my train of thought. And any other questions? Well, there's a lot of ideas in the chat. And Bob just brought up, we've had, the anti-Semitic defacing that you showed, what's happening here in Chicago.
Yep.
And if you want to email Dan, there's his email. I will be sharing with my colleagues what a great program it was this morning. And when you're ready to go live with the other one, hopefully we'll be back in person, and then you're only Lake Forest. It's like, it's a stone's throw. It's
well, and I'm probably going to be I'm house shopping right now. So I'll probably be in Buffalo Grove, Northbrook, Deerfield. I'm going to be around, I'm around the area. So it is truly a stone's throw.
Surely. And anything else you can share with us of, what set you on this path?
It was I certainly, like I kind of alluded to earlier, I was in a very, living in a very Christian run state. I mean, it's no surprise that Oklahoma is, when the governor is running for governor, they're at churches and there are crosses in their ads on television. Legislation is passed based on Christian understanding of what they want in society. And so it was my way to fight back the way I could. I wasn't going to affect legislation. I wanted to, I was just sick of playing music where people would walk out and say, "Oh, that was nice," and then on to the next thing. Let's go get, some pancakes and we're on to the next. But I think a combination of those things led me to believe that I think I could do more. I could create more impact. And so that's what kind of started my thoughts down that journey. I'm sure, and I learned even from, after having performed this and being like, wow, this was the most successful performance I have ever given. I'm finding that now with the video, and it's a never-ending journey to kind of make the program better and better and better. And so, I'm really, I felt very fortunate that the university was able to provide resources for me to do that. It's obviously not cheap to go fly halfway around the world and spend time, setting up recording equipment and all that kind of stuff. So, I was really lucky. It was a combination of luck and just kind of my own thoughts on what I could be doing more, and that kind of bystander to upstander thing. And just how do you, keep the message around.
So there will be a link on YouTube tomorrow. Give me 24 hours to upload this. And we have a YouTube channel, Macomb Soleil Lakeside. And if you can't find that, just email me and I'll send you a link. But I think this is an important piece, as all of us have said. There's so many good ideas in the chat of who should be hearing this. And, the strike happened in February, and here it is, February 27th.
The strike ended today.
Yeah.
On this day, February 27th.
Yeah. And, and look where we are in 2022.
Yeah. It's looks like history is repeating itself in a variety of ways. And so, I'm certainly thinking about Ukraine this morning. But yeah.
I think we all are.
Yeah.
I thank everybody. Watch your Macomb at home. Next week we have you'll look in your Macomb at home. Dan Kootenai, he's an author of a book, and unfortunately about anti-Semitism. But I know you'll like it. And if you need anything, you know where to get a hold of me. Dan, we cannot thank you enough. We're so glad you're staying in Chicago.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you so much for what you brought to Macomb Soleil Lakeside.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll see everybody.
Bye.
you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.